We have a twofer, Mary and Kai. We have some major updates on stories we've been following and investigating on Fox 45 News in depth. First, a gap in information sharing about students' criminal records. Despite a policy change requiring these reportable offense details to be shared, one school system is not part of it. Plus, a route has been selected for the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project. That's the 70-mile proposed transmission line. But what's next and what some lawmakers are now debating? All coming up. We're going in depth right after this. Major updates in two topics we've been following for months: juvenile justice and the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project. The superintendent of the Juvenile Services Education Program sounding the alarm.
We do not currently transfer any criminal history.
About a gap in information sharing that could put students' safety at risk. I'm demanding answers to find out what lawmakers can do to close that gap. Plus, we now know the proposed path for that 70-mile transmission line cutting across 3 Maryland counties.
I think people are going to adamantly oppose it just as strongly as it's been opposed from the beginning.
We're going in depth on the impact to Maryland landowners. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Fox 45 News in Depth. I'm Mackenzie Frost. Tonight, we're bringing you updates on two major storylines we've been following: juvenile justice and the Maryland Piedmont Reliability Project. The group behind that project just released the official route on the transmission line that it will follow. We'll take a closer look at that coming up in just a few minutes. But we begin with some new concerns over juvenile crime and how DJS and school systems communicate information about juvenile offenders with each other. The state school board of education adopted emergency rules after a Howard High School student was arrested with a loaded gun in his backpack and accused of murder.
I assure our community that I would not approve a placement at Howard High School. Good decisions are predicated on accurate data, and I now know that there is important data not available to the school system that informs our placement.
Now, schools must share information about a student's criminal record. We first told you about reportable offenses on this show a month ago. Now, as we continue to dig into the issue, we found a major gap in the information sharing system that only lawmakers can fix. In Maryland, schools must be notified if a student is arrested for a crime known as a reportable offense if the crime took place off campus. Those crimes include things like homicide, attempted homicide, aggravated assault, carjacking, and more. While information sharing is now required among public schools in Maryland, students learning while incarcerated in a juvenile facility don't fall into that category. During our interview with Department of Juvenile Services Secretary Vincent Schiraldi, why wouldn't DJS just make that information available or share that information proactively instead of waiting for policy changes or something, unfortunate to happen like we saw play out in Howard County?
Right. Well, JSEP's not under me. It's under a board. I'm a member of that board, but I don't control that board. And we have to see what the law allows us to do or doesn't allow us to do.
So,
My name is Kimberly Pogue.
we spoke with the superintendent of the Juvenile Services Education Program, or JSEP. Pogue says when a student is ready to re-enroll in a public school after leaving a DJS incarceration setting, JSEP works with the school to transfer educational records. And when it comes to transferring the students' records, is there the history of the student's criminal record part of that information that gets transferred to the public school when they re-enroll?
No, we only transfer their educational progress while they're with JSEP. Again, to ensure that there's no loss of their educational progress in the transfer. We do not currently transfer any criminal history and any of that background when they transfer back to their home school.
Will that be changing given the new policy shift that was announced by the State Board of Education?
There would need to be some, as far as I understand, some statutory changes that would require or treat JSEP as a local educational agency because we're currently not considered one in the statutes.
And so at this point, it would be up to the state lawmakers come January to change that.
Yes, I believe that is currently what would need to happen to allow JSEP to be able to transfer that type of information.
We checked with the State Department of Education asking, does the board believe JSEP should be required to also share the criminal records of students? And is that something the board can change via policy, or does that need to be legislatively adjusted? MSDE says the state superintendent, Dr. Carrie Wright, and the Board of Education believe superintendents should be provided with relevant information. This should include JSEP, and we are actively partnering with the state officials to identify the best way to close the communication gap. MSDE confirming requiring JSEP to share information needs to come from the General Assembly. But JSEP Superintendent Pogue says the information about students' criminal records right now isn't even known to them.
Of course, we know that if they're with us, there has been some sort of activity, but we don't have the details as to why a student has come to JSEP.
Is that something that would be beneficial to the teachers or to the social workers or anybody within JSEP to know that information?
Maybe the social workers, I don't know if it would have anything of any assistance for our teachers, just because, you know, we know that because they're with us, there has been some type of activity.
While the state education department continues to review policies.
No, we're not part of the conversation currently. Again, we're not notified of reportable offenses as students transfer to us. Again, we know that they're with us, and we just want to make sure we have their educational records.
The breakdown in information sharing among public schools statewide sparked Governor Wes Moore to order a top-to-bottom review of DJS. Will the public see the results of that review, and do you have a timeline for the findings?
Well, the thing I think we're going to see is the public will not just see their reviews, they'll see the results. They'll see the fact that we have a department that is going to be better functioning and better support.
Not a clear answer from the governor about the timing of the review or the findings. Any legislative change will have to wait until lawmakers return to Annapolis for session in January. I reached out to House Speaker Adrian Jones, Senate President Bill Ferguson, and the chair of an education committee, Senator Brian Feldman, asking if they will address the JSEP info sharing during next legislative session. So far, I have not gotten a response. I also asked Pogue about teacher vacancy rates at JSEP schools. She says vacancy rates dropped from around 20% to 11% overall between September 2023 and September 2024. Right now, JSEP has an 11% vacancy rate in the western region, an 18% vacancy rate in the central region, and a 0% vacancy rate on the eastern shore. Pogue also says JSEP has developed a virtual school to help address teacher vacancies. Certified teachers staff at the Garrett Children's Center, which currently has no students of its own, and teach virtually alongside in-person instructors to classes in any JSEP school facing vacancies. Just this week, Fox 45 News learned a 16-year-old Havre de Grace high school student is accused of killing 14-year-old Jaden Winchester. The suspect appearing in court Monday, where it was revealed this is not the first time he was accused of a crime. Authorities say he has a prior case pending in the juvenile system, but the details are not clear. The Harford County school system says they had not received any prior reportable offense charges. Harford County saw a similar case in September. Police say a 16-year-old student shot and killed 15-year-old Warren Grant inside a Joppatown High School bathroom. The Harford County Sheriff says the suspect had interactions with law enforcement dating back to 2022, but the public cannot access those details because of current state law.
I hope my frustration is clear that this legislature has handcuffed police. There are families of every other student in that school and the parents of the shooter who have a right to know why we all stand here today and why there's a person who has been shot in one of our schools, and we are not allowed to ask the person who committed that act because of this crazy legislature we have in this state.
DJS monitoring policies have also come under fire after several recent cases of teens under DJS supervision go on to commit more crimes. Just 2 weeks ago, Baltimore police arrested a 12-year-old and a 14-year-old who allegedly robbed a man at gunpoint. Police say the 12-year-old was wearing an ankle monitor and had 5 prior robbery arrests. Last month, Baltimore police arrested 3 teens they say robbed a Royal Farms in Canton. The teen suspects were put on ankle monitors only to return to the same store later the same day and allegedly tried to rob it again. And arguably most notable, 2 suspects in last year's Brooklyn Day mass shooting that killed 2 people and injured 28 others were also under DJS supervision at the time of the shooting. One of those suspects was 18-year-old Tristan Jackson, who was under supervision for bringing a loaded gun to Merville High School when he was still 17. Despite these apparent failures in monitoring, DJS Secretary Vincent Schiraldi continues to defend his department's policies, claiming ankle monitors are overwhelmingly successful.
They're working 94.6% of the time, so 19 out of 20 times. It's easy to, in the rearview mirror, say, oh, something happened, this system must not be working. But if you put that 19 kids that didn't reoffend in detention, what would happen is they tend to get more hardened. They don't do as well in school. They kind of don't re-engage in school very often, and it exacerbates people's mental health problems.
Now, we've been questioning how DJS defines success given the number of examples of young people found committing crimes while on ankle monitors. We're now learning the 94% success rate Secretary Schiraldi continues to tout only counts whether a kid wearing an ankle monitor gets rearrested or not. Legal experts say it's giving the public a false sense of reality. DJS Secretary Vincent Schiraldi remains a firm believer in his efforts to curb juvenile crime and reform young offenders.
I want people to at least understand the way this works. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. A family whose loved one has been harmed may or may not be, happy with what I'm saying right now, but I want them at least to understand that we are trying to improve public safety. We're trying to do it by holding kids accountable and by turning their lives around and rehabilitating them, and that most often that's working well.
These numbers were very easy to see through. If you were a trial attorney, it just took some time to uncover.
Jeremy Eldridge, a Baltimore area trial attorney, says the statistics from DJS is not offering the state of Maryland a full picture of what's really going on after Fox 45 News learned ankle monitor violations don't count toward diminished success rates.
So just because an individual may not be arrested doesn't necessarily mean that they weren't brought back into court somewhere between 1, 2, even 10 times, released back onto monitoring, and that still wouldn't count as a failure. That sounds like very poor measurement of this tool's success or failure.
Eldridge isn't the only one to question data from DJS.
We're not hearing or seeing it at all. And to remind you, I represent all the sheriffs throughout the state, not just Carroll County. So I get the stories from throughout the state, and we're not seeing that.
Carroll County Sheriff Jim DeWeese, quick to raise concerns about the reality on the ground when it comes to juvenile crime compared to the picture being painted by DJS leaders.
At what point does the governor step in and take action? And I know that he's now looking, he says, closely at statistics that are coming in. And I've seen some reporting where people have said that, the governor will take action with the secretary when he becomes a political liability. And I think everybody agrees he's beyond being a political liability. He is a political liability for the governor. He's now a public safety liability for anybody that's out there.
Ultimately,
what do you think the real success rate is if we were to factor in the violations of kids wearing ankle monitors?
As a trial attorney and former prosecutor who handles a fair number of juvenile cases all over the state of Maryland, I really would put the compliance level at closer to 60 to 70%, which is still great for that 60 to 70% of successful young people who may not be reoffending or may be compliant. But we have to give the public a fair perspective of the non-compliance as opposed to pretending it's perfect.
Eldridge says it would be up to lawmakers in Annapolis or Governor Wes Moore to require DJS to produce data that includes violations by kids wearing ankle monitors. It's unclear if that request will be made by those who have the power to do so. New juvenile justice laws are in place now. Under the new laws, juveniles 10 to 12 years old can be charged with more crimes, including handgun violations, animal abuse, and others. If a child under 13 is accused of stealing a car for the first time, a child in need of supervision or SINS petition will be filed. Probation will also be extended in some cases, and state's attorney's offices will be told earlier when a young person is charged with a felony. Also, part of the changes to the juvenile justice system is the creation of a commission to review issues within juvenile facilities and the system as a whole. The commission met for the first time last night. DJS Secretary Vincent Schiraldi is part of the group, but had little to say at its first meeting. The commission is made up of 26 members, including a sheriff, a public defender, a DJS staffer, and a retired federal judge, Andre Davis, serving as its chair. Maryland House Speaker Adrian Jones telling the members the state is in desperate need of improvements.
Right now, juveniles aren't getting the services they need. Right now, agencies aren't sharing enough information with each other.
The chairman telling commissioners he plans to hold 6 meetings a year. He says that will be scheduled for 2 hours each, but they may not last the full 2 hours. That means the commission will spend just 12 hours a year or less talking juvenile justice issues, and critics say it's not enough.
It shows you how the governor prioritizes children. Children are only worth 12 hours to him out of a whole damn year.
This week, we asked if you think lawmakers are acting urgently enough to address violent crimes committed by young people. If not, what would you like to see them do? We'll take a look at some of your responses coming up a little later in the show. We know the official route for the 70-mile transmission line that would cut across 3 Maryland counties. A closer look at where it could go, how the path was selected, and the reaction from residents and lawmakers alike. And as we head to break, let's take a look at some of today's top headlines.
Rush hour traffic brought to a standstill Thursday after gunfire reportedly flew across the highway.
That's not something you hear every day.
Around 8:40 a.m., a time the roadways are packed with morning commuters. BPD confirming a 22-year-old man was shot along I-295 just before the Annapolis Road exit. As the victim was being rushed to the hospital, investigators learning those injuries could have been much worse, and all drivers put in harm's way.
We found one.
Nearly a dozen shots potentially fired.
19-year-old Quante Spinks denied bond after appearing by video here inside Baltimore City District Court. The judge telling the court, "I find Mr. Spinks possesses a severe danger to the community. This is a spree, 4 different locations, a murder." Newly obtained court documents shed new light on the shooting death of 36-year-old Antonio Peoples in Harbor East back on September 14th. Here, indicating surveillance video captured the homicide, a believed robbery. And investigators connected the incident to additional ballistic and forensic evidence and used digital and cellular data to help identify Spinks and place him near the scene. Following today's bond hearing, believed family or supporters of Spinks declined to comment, only expressing anger the cameras were recording outside the district courthouse.
We're also following major developments surrounding the Piedmont Reliability Project. That's the 70-mile transmission line cutting across 3 counties in the state. The Public Service Enterprise Group, the developer behind the project, recently released the proposed route. It starts in northern Baltimore County between Sorsich Mills and Shane Valley. From there, it continues west, cutting through northern Baltimore County before crossing into Carroll County. It dips south through Carroll County and continues to move south to the west of Westminster. From there, it continues south, entering Frederick County near Sam's Creek. It continues southwest through Frederick County before ending near Prophet Acres. Developers say this route is the best option for landowners across Maryland, but some residents are not so sure.
I think people are going to adamantly oppose it just as strongly as it's been opposed from the beginning, and maybe even stronger now, because now it's, it's more real, right? This is the final proposed line.
Fox 45's Jessica Babb joins us now to talk more about the new route. Jessica, how has the community been responding since this route was unveiled?
Yeah, residents I've talked with are frustrated and upset with the final proposed route being selected. Many property owners tell me the reality of the project is now setting in. And the route is also slightly different than some of the proposed routes, so some residents also felt blindsided when their properties showed up on the final route.
How did PSEG determine this was the best route to move forward with?
Mackenzie, there was a lot of different criteria. The developers, Public Service Enterprise Group, say they looked at many factors. After looking at more than 5,000 public comments, while project officials acknowledged no route was perfect, they say the route they picked impacted fewer conservation easements, had fewer residences, and community facilities in close proximity. They also say the route was shorter and had fewer turns, which then reduces the cost and complexity of the project. Jason Calwa, a project director for PSEG, says they also considered routing the line parallel to existing infrastructure, which was one of the calls from many community leaders and elected officials. But they ultimately said it would require removing about 90 homes and buildings. Since their goal is to avoid as many existing buildings as possible, they just said it wasn't a feasible option.
That's interesting. So, Jessica, how many homes will ultimately be impacted by this route selection?
Yeah, so within the 150-foot right-of-way where this transmission line could ultimately go, there's 384 properties. And if you look at the 200 feet on either side of that right-of-way, there's another 226 properties that will be impacted according to PSEG.
Wow. So what does this mean for the application with the PSC now that this first step has been taken?
Yeah, so now that this final proposed route has been selected, PSEG will be holding more informational sessions later this month where public input can still be expressed. And they say they could make some tweaks to the route, but really this route is likely going to be the route they end up submitting in their application to the Public Service Commission, which is the state agency that will either approve this project or not. And they plan to submit this project later this year or early next year.
All right, Jessica Babb, thank you so much for that information. This is something we will continue to keep a close eye on, and I know you will do that. Thanks. Now, people continue to express frustration with the proposed transmission line, with many concerned for their properties after PSEG finalized its route. Several residents we spoke with say the transmission line will directly impact them and their families.
My first immediate was, oh, thank goodness they're not taking my dad's retirement home anymore, because that's what the original route was. And then my second immediate response was, but now they're taking my neighbor's home that lives up there.
They're running the line, it's directly through our farm, and will sit right in front of where we are building what we plan to be our forever home.
Now, Maryland Senator Chris West is announcing plans to introduce a group of bills during the next legislative session to address the transmission line and Maryland's energy needs. One bill will direct the Public Service Commission to defer any decision on the application for this transmission line until May 2026. The lawmaker says by that time, the General Assembly will have had an opportunity to look into Maryland's power problems. Right now, Maryland does not produce enough electricity to meet the needs of its residents. It has to be imported from other states. While he says the state made efforts to bring more private companies to build power plants in the past, it hasn't happened yet, and he wants to bring up legislation that could do more to help fill the gap. There has been a push for more energy to come from renewable resources, but Senator West says that isn't enough.
We're being foolish if we say, let's just close everything else down on a wish and a prayer that maybe renewables will satisfy our needs in time, because the answer is they won't. We need other forms of electricity.
Now, as Jessica mentioned, PSEG will hold public information sessions next week, one in Hunt Valley on Tuesday, another in Westminster on Wednesday, and the final public meeting in Brunswick on Thursday. All three will take place from 6 until 8:30 p.m. You can find more information on those meetings on the Fox 45 News app. And we asked if you think lawmakers are acting urgently enough to address violent crimes committed by young people, and if not, what would you like to see them do? We'll take a look at your responses after the break. We asked if you think lawmakers are acting urgently enough to address violent crimes committed by young people, and if not, what would you like to see them do? Let's take a look at what some people are saying in a response to these questions. Let's take a look at this one. We have civil penalties for the parents. Got to hold someone accountable. That's something we know that state's attorneys have also talked about, their job, point blank. And 3 years ago, lawmakers acted urgently and changed the laws. Now you expect them to fix things that they have broken. It seems extremely unrealistic. That's all for this week's edition of Fox 45 News in Depth. I'm Mackenzie Frost.